Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Safe Room. I'm your host, the President Sean Williams, and today we're here with another guest. And I'm telling you, today, this guest is someone special. Someone special I idolize, someone I've been looking toward in terms of the work that they're doing for a long, long time. And listen, if you haven't heard of the Black Podcaster Association, but you might have to just stop this episode, go follow them, come back here and get excited because today we have the face of the BPA, the face who's behind everything, the behind the scenes, basically putting the names out there and is like the ultimate like podcast supporter. If you are a podcaster, this episode's for you and you can definitely gain some valuable insights based on his personal experience. And again, he's still learning, so that's what makes it even better. He's giving you knowledge, but he's also learning as well. So it's an inclusive space. That's why it's called the Safe Room. But today we got Mr. Corey Gumbs. Corey, how are you doing?
Hey, thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
I appreciate it, man. I really appreciate it. I know you and we're not even in Canada. We're in different countries at this moment. So like the connection right here, the States and Canada coming together, it's beautiful. I love it.
Oh, definitely. Podcasting is a global medium. It's important that we recognize everybody.
Of course. And, we're definitely going to get into detail in terms of just the state of Canadian podcasting and American podcasting, just overall how these two landscapes have kind of built for themselves, but also how can we bring it together? Because I know a lot of people on my end always wonder, how come the American podcast gets so much reaction, but the Canadian podcast is still struggling to, get to that level? I feel like that's a conversation I hear a lot. And I'm hoping with you on here, we could, dive a bit into that just to see like what makes it so different, but what also makes it different. So what makes it unique in a way. And hopefully there can be some level of like collaboration at the end or how we can work together. Because again, as podcasters, we just want the best for all of us. We're all in this together and we just want to be able to have a platform to share what we want to share. So I'm excited to kind of have you on to get into that conversation.
Definitely.
Of course. So before we get into actually like the meat and potatoes of the conversation, we have to start with our opening segment, which is the check-in, the hot seat. And basically, 4 simple questions I'm going to ask you, and I just want you to answer them to your best abilities, okay?
All right, no problem. I feel like I'm always on the hot seat, though.
Then this is perfect for you. You're going to nail it. I know you will. Okay, so the first question I want to ask you, so outside the work that you do, being someone again who's heavily, active in podcasting, tell me something about yourself in one sentence.
Funny. Even at this point, I still struggle talking about myself. But I'm a single father of 3 wonderful children. Well, adult and teenagers and preteen. Outside of podcasting, I have a background in music. I used to be in a rap group when I was younger, way back in the days, and I interned at Def Jam. I was a part of like the Foxy Brown project when she first came out, and Redman's Muddy Waters, DMX. I was there for all of that stuff. So also am a web developer. I turned a hobby into a skill set, and that I bring all of these experiences that I've had into my business now. So those are like the 3 main things. I'm an avid reader. I love to read, and I'm a huge movie buff. And history buff. So those are like the things that have really encompassed me now as an older adult.
That's such an impressive like kind of resume that you listed off, like someone working in the music industry, avid reader, web developer, how you're extrapolating those skill sets into the stuff you do right now. It's kind of it feels like you've done a lot, but still again trying to grow and like develop, which is crazy.
Well, I know for me, I have a different perspective because like I've done a lot. I have done a lot. Real estate investor, I've done a lot of different things. It's just who I am, and web development, well, programming and podcasting has seemed to be able to hold my interest the longest out of everything that I've done. But I also did a lot from when I was a younger age. So when I was at Def Jam, I was in the clubs and I partied with stars and I was on tour. So by the time I was 22 years old, I had done a whole lot. So it's like I got that out my system. So, but those experiences, I've definitely learned to impart them into what I'm doing in the community that I built around me.
Yeah, it's truly amazing. The fact that you said like you did all of that at the age of 22, that's kind of crazy because I'm 22 myself, and it's like, bro, what? Like, I'm 22 now, and I'm just feel like I'm getting my feet wet. It's like, yeah, I was doing Def Jam, and I know Biggie. It was nothing, but
Yeah.
no, for real, that's amazing. That's amazing to hear. I think that's quite a feat to share right there. But again, you said that when it comes to web development and podcasting, something that's been in the long run. And I feel like for a lot of people, once they're like in their early 20s and they're trying to discover what they want to do, there's tend to be that one thing that sticks with them for years to come. They might be doing outside projects and they may be working with other people, but there's always that one thing that they could fall back to and say, this is kind of like my main interest, or this is the thing I want to really pursue long term. So I can definitely respect that. So yeah.
Well, look, man, you're 22. Look what you do. Look what you're building for yourself here. So I wouldn't diminish, what you've accomplished by 22. You're doing this now, and that's an important part of podcasting. I know you have some other questions to ask, but I think people when they come into this space, when they come into this space, they have these lofty or these ideas of what they're going to do and where they're going to be at. It's not easy for people to see that part, so they start to question themselves and do all those different things. But I just want you don't diminish, what you've accomplished for yourself, because I've also did a lot of mistakes by the time I was 22, also. So it kind of balances itself out.
Yeah, I feel you. I feel you for sure. I really appreciate the kind words. Okay, the second question I want to get to, and this one might be a tricky one. So, like, I want to see what your answer is going to be for that. Your favorite podcast you're listening to right now?
I like to be transparent because of the nature of what I do. Believe it or not, I don't listen to podcasts as much as I used to. One, because of COVID. I used to commute a lot. I live in New York City, so I would travel, bus, train. That gave me an opportunity to spend an hour, hour and a half to listen to a podcast while I was on the bus, while I was in my commute. Because of COVID, I've adapted to learning to work from home. I'm not in my car as much. It's usually short distances, or I'm not on the train or the bus like I used to. So I don't listen to about as many podcasts. I do listen to a lot of music podcasts. So for me, I'm like into deep house. Like I need like when I'm working, I like to listen to music. I can't listen to music that's too distracting, like with words and stuff like that. So I listen to like deep house or I'm a piano. I've lately been listening to a lot of I'm a piano podcasts. But if I say there was a podcast that I was really listening to a lot, it would be Nora and Pure, her deep house, deep tracks podcast. I definitely listen to that. And when I can, This Week in Startups is also another one that I listen to with Jason Calcanis. I listen to that one a lot because I still try to stay connected to tech, though I'm not in that space right now. And it also helps bring me to see what's coming, what's coming out there. Talk about because a lot of the tech and podcasting run parallel to each other. So I just pay attention to those things.
Yeah, I definitely feel that. And you know what? I totally understand your aspect of like the work that you do. You would not get so in tune into a lot of podcasts because I also feel like that's the stage I'm going through right now. Like for me, when I started off, I would listen to so many podcasters, and now it's like if there's an episode that comes out, if I have the time, then I'll take a listen. But other than that, I really won't be like, oh, the minute the episode drops, I'm there, or like I'm gonna take the time to listen to it. It really depends. So like I definitely resonate with what you're saying. I feel like that's not even a bad thing. I think it's just like part of you being a podcaster, you get so into the stuff that you're doing that you start to appreciate it more. And it's not to say that, oh, I don't appreciate listening to other podcasts. It now becomes something where, oh, it's kind of like if I have the time, it's like a hobby or maybe like on the
Right.
sidelines and everything like that. I feel like also if you're someone who's starting off with a podcast, you may tend to listen to more podcasts just to see how they sound. Hopefully, they get some feedback or maybe take away things from what they're doing. So I feel like that's a very common attribute as well. So I totally get it. I totally get it because like there's so much episodes I need to catch up on. I'm like, where do I find the time to even like sit down for an hour and actually listen to this? Because it's like it's just too much.
From a business point of view, I don't know your audience if you have a lot of podcasters come to you, but this conversation right here is important because you're competing for people's time, right? You're competing for them to listen to your podcast. So that's why it's important that you make sure you create good content, engaging content, so that people can be like, hey, this is a part of my routine. I think what's the statistics are about people listen to the average podcast listens to 7 podcasts a week. So you have about 7 hours that they devote time to your content. So it's basically almost like a first impression. You got to make sure you know when you swing that bet. I do a lot of sports references, so sorry. You at that plate, you swing that bat, you make sure you get that hit counts. It puts you in scoring position. So I think that's important. But I don't like the idea that I'm in this space, but I'm around podcasting so much and I'm learning so much from different people that I feel like I am listening to podcasts. It's just not a podcast. But there are ones that I really love. Like I used to listen to a lot of political podcasts, science podcasts, tech podcasts that I do miss listening to. I'm hoping to free up some time so I can start catching up on those podcasts.
Yeah, I definitely feel you. I definitely feel you. Okay. So the third question I have for you is an interesting fact you rarely share about yourself.
I'm pretty. First of all, like Forrest Gump said, I'm a simple man. I'm not a complicated person. I'm pretty transparent. That's a good one, man. What's the question again? Something that
So, like, what's an interesting fact that you rarely share about yourself that you don't really share that much with anyone?
I don't even know how to answer that one because you know what it is. Like since I've been in this space, I understand storytelling now, and I've had so many life experiences and done so many different things that I tell those stories now. So it's like I've been traumatized from a kid. I'm a very opinionated person. I'm very vocal about what I like and don't like. So it's hard for me to answer that publicly because if you've seen me, you've seen my Facebook, you see me on Twitter or something, you'd see that Corey shares his opinions. But and I can't think of anything right now because I put my story out there, so it's hard. Can I come back to this? You said that you thought the other one was hard. No, this is hard. I've done music. I've done man. This is the first time I've been stumped on a question.
Oh man, I mean,
I'm not a person who talks about. I'm not a big talking about myself person. So I don't. When people ask me questions about myself, it's usually like I don't know.
it's very common too because I feel like we're always like work, 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 and understandably, again, we're trying to get to that next echelon, and sometimes we forget to take that moment to pause and be like, wait, like let me give myself some praise and everything. And that's something I try to create in this type
Mhm.
of space here on the safe room. So like, and just to let you know as well, you're not the first person to be stuck on this question. There have been multiple people who are
It's a
like,
good
I'm gonna have to
question.
get back to you for that.
That's a good question. Then here's what I'll say. I'm not as confident in what I do as people think I am. There's a lot of things that happen behind the scenes, a lot of personal battles and the conflicts that I deal with, you know, that I deal with behind the scenes. I don't think I talk about that too much about, being a leader of people, having the responsibility of a community, running a community while also trying to survive because I do this full time and I'm not making a lot of money off of it. So I'll just keep that real. Like I'm making enough, but it's not, I can go and retire, right? And I don't always get the support or people don't always step up as I expect them to. So sometimes I have to stop being who I am and be more of a diplomat because I can be very aggressive. Born and raised 80s, 90s New York, been through the crack era, all that stuff. So I have certain mentalities. I'm not gonna say I am 50 Cent, but I come from the same neighborhood as 50 Cent. So we have a lot of similar type of attitudes on how we deal with things. Sometimes there's no place for that in the business world that I'm dealing with. So it is an inner conflict that I sometimes have to be like, you know what, I'm gonna go take a walk. I'm gonna get off this call and I'm
Mm.
gonna go take a walk before I, burn this bridge.
I feel you. I feel you for sure. And again, even you saying that you don't feel confident sometimes when like doing the work, but people don't really see that. I feel like it's really great to hear because I think a lot of people get that perception of
Hmm.
if someone is at a high point of what they're doing, then usually the overall census of like everyone else, like society, like, oh, this person's probably doing like really great and like everything is going right in their life. But sometimes they need to hear it from those individuals, like, no, like not only did I go through the same struggles as you did, but I'm still having it like today. It's not like it was the past and once I leveled up,
Right.
they magically disappeared. Like, no, they still exist today. So I feel like for anyone listening here, I feel like it's good that you're sharing this because it lets them know that like everyone goes through their trials and tribulations. It's just a matter of how are you able to really, just grow past it, but also accept the flaws. This is one thing I always say. I feel like perfection comes when you actually accept the imperfections of yourself. That's when you start to realize, okay, like I don't have to personify myself as this like top tier 100% all the time figure. It's like there are going to be days like I'm going to be down low, down bad, and that's okay because you know what? I'm going to learn to grow from these lessons and be able to get to a level where I can be successful, where I can really tap into my full potential. So I'm glad you did share that because I feel like that is an interesting fact. You kind of did answer the question, but at the same time, it's like, you know,
It's not, but that's why when we see a celebrity like commit suicide, or we find out they did a drug overdose, or something happens with them, people are like, "Oh my god," but we don't realize like myself, I have such a high standard on what I do. I always joke around with people and be like, "Yeah, I make it look easy, but I don't know what I'm doing." And I think people need to understand in this podcast space, especially as you see the news and you see the ups and downs of what's going on in podcasting. Almost everybody in this space doesn't know what they're doing. This is a new medium. It hasn't, it's been around for a while, but as a business, how we see it today, it hasn't been around that long. The pandemic just shot it, skyrocketed way up. So everybody's learning through trial by fire, and sometimes I have to remind myself, like, yo, like, you're talking to the people who've been doing this a long time, who've been very successful, and then they're coming to you, or they're coming asking you questions. You're like, I'm looking at you like the expert, and you coming asking me expert advice. So we all are trying to figure out what we're doing, and that's where I think I find some solace in that, because if I may be questioning myself and my confidence, or what I think I bring to the table, or just why, like, sometimes I ask myself, why did I create this community? Like, why did I do this to myself? But then you talk to other people, you see, and you're like, oh, we're all in the same boat. We just might be on different sides of the boat, but we're on the same boat, and we're all trying to figure it out. So I like that idea. And then we all collectively come together and try to figure things out. And now you know who to tap into, who you can, talk to in this subject, that subject. So that's where it's kind of helped me navigate through that part of me.
yeah, definitely, for sure. Okay. Okay, the final question for this opening segment. It's crazy that we're almost at the 20-minute mark, and this is only the opening parts of the conversation, but I love the flow that we're on. So let's keep it going. So the final question, what is your personal safe room? So like what's a personal safe space that you kind of find haven in?
If you know me personally, there's two places you can find me. Typically, either at Starbucks, and because I'm always doing work at Starbucks, or at the movie theaters. Shout out to Regal, because that movie pass thing that they have, I milk the hell out of it. I love movies. I love going to the movie theater. So I have the unlimited pass. I'm always in the movie theater. So I saw Oppenheimer 5 times. Like, I was like, I'm bored. I ain't got nothing else to do. Let me in. I'm a huge Oppenheimer fan. The physics and everything. So I was like, oh, let me go watch. And I like the director and the art, the actors in it. So I was like, and I really enjoyed the movie. So I was like, let me go. And then I'm talking to my friends, hey, you want to go to the movie? You want to go to the movie? So for me, my safe space, I would say, would be the movie theater, where I can get to sit and relax for a couple of hours and just enjoy something I really enjoy doing.
Yeah, I love that. You're probably the first person to use the movies as like their safe room because it's very interesting. A lot of people kind of give the common answers like, "Oh, it's my room," or maybe like my office, which is my room, or maybe like it's like in a mental space or something like that. But the movie, it's like it's just a little space where I can just go out there and just chill and relax and like listen. For me, I do like watching movies as well, so it's good to like even be in those atmospheres, especially if it's like a very big movie with lots of promotion, like premiere day. Those are like the best because sometimes you'll have people doing the reactions as well, and it's always
Yeah.
like a great vibe for sure.
Well, for me, and I'm an audio person, so it's like, one time my friend, he got the seats, and I chewed him all the way out, because I was like, you gone to the movies when you know long enough to know you sit dead center. That's where you hear all the surround sound, you get the whole full effect of the movie theater experience. He's like, man, you do, you do this too much. But I was like, I like the full experience, right? But it's also, for me, I don't like being in the house. I never like being in the house. So when COVID happened, it was a huge adjustment period for me. Now, because I do what I do, I have my whole studio and setup and everything, so I'm home a lot. But that's why I was always in Starbucks, because when I was in school for web development, and when I would just go to Starbucks, and I'd be there from like 9 a.m. to close, just getting work done. So So the movies helps me to also keep that part without having to be out all day long because I do have a lot of stuff to get done.
Yeah. I feel you. I feel you. But yeah, that's pretty much everything from our hot seats. I mean, I think you did very well. So like for someone who said that you're putting the hot seat as often, I feel like you killed it. Now, I now want to get into the Black Podcast Association because that's what we're here for. I want to talk about the work that you do because may I just say, incredible work. The amount of stuff that goes into it is crazy. Like I just see whether it's like social media or even through like just the newsletters or the emails, some of the different events and the people you collaborate with. Is I can see your face. You're just like, it's a lot. It's a
That's why I
lot.
said sometimes I ask myself, like, why did I do this to myself?
For sure, for sure. But I did want to ask you. It's a very simple question, which is probably like usually I try to make questions a little bit more deeper, but this is really simple from my standard. Just what was the purpose for creating the Black Podcasters Association?
It's a great question because it's a very important question. It's a nuanced story, but I'll try to keep it short. So when I got into the podcasting space, I was in like a lot of people. I was in Facebook groups and I was in a lot of different Facebook groups because I was just trying to consume and try to learn and see what people are talking about and just try to learn as much as I possibly could about this thing called podcasting so that I could execute my goals. And it wasn't, a lot. I don't think people understand at the time there wasn't a lot of black and brown people in this space. So, BIPOC people in this space. When COVID happened, it just spiked, right? We traditionally, when I look at some of the data, was traditionally around 13, sometimes 16, but average between 11 to 14% of listeners were people of color. So the conversations in some of these groups just started. I don't want to call it racism. I don't want to call it that, but it was like you could tell there was like cultural differences. Some of it was racism. Some of it was you just don't understand the dynamics of this particular person's or group people's content. So it was like a lot of headbanging. Like somebody might say, "Well, just go buy this, buy that." And I'm sitting here like, and I don't like saying this too much because it's not necessarily true, but certain groups don't have access to resources like that. I don't have an uncle that can give me $2,500 to go invest in my, build a podcast studio. I may not have $100 to buy me, an expensive brand mic. And then for me, it was really the conversation of like almost judgmental. And I was just like, I was talking to a friend and she was like, well, why don't you start your own group? And then you can control the conversation. So that's how we started. We started as a Facebook group and then COVID happened, literally launched when COVID hit New York City. That was the crazy part. We launched the Facebook group and then it just took off. And I was just trying to find, like, I didn't know. I was just like, like we need to have our own place. We need to have our own thing because it was like a new medium that, didn't have a lot of representation, diversity in it. And then they were talking about starting a podcast academy. Now, coming from music and always being, in loving movies, and being a huge history buff, especially Black history, I was like, okay, here's a new medium that is beginning. And what I don't want is for us to join the party late, be a part of it from the beginning, but then get the benefits of it late, like we did in music, TV, movies, and stuff like that. And I wanted to make sure we had a seat at this table because when they was talking about building the podcast academy, when I looked at it, I was like, it didn't have a lot of diversity in the beginning. The companies that were associated, I was like, here we go again, where when Black content is not going to be recognized. So it started that way, and then as the Facebook group grew and we started to figure out what my messaging and who we are, I was like, this needs to be a safe space for Black content creators. It needs to be a place where we can talk how we want to talk without code switching, where we can learn and how some of us experts can come and present the information in a way that our people can consume it versus like the way that we see in our counterparts.
I definitely love that vision because again, sometimes depending on the spaces that you kind of fall in, you may not be able to not only pick up information but have just the accessibility to like learn and share or even express certain aspects. And again, for someone like you who kind of saw that opportunity with this new medium, you want to jump right ahead and not be late to the party, like you mentioned. I think it's really crucial because a lot of times we may see some opportunities as Black folks and sometimes we may jump on it, but others sometimes we may like shy away because we're kind of worried about what's the risk in doing that. So I feel like for you to take that jump and know that like this is something that we can really capitalize on is really great. And obviously it worked out in the end because it kind of just spanned out and it's become the beautiful nucleus that it is today. So that's really great to hear. But I did want to ask like a follow-up question because again, you mentioned when it came to like podcasts and even for like black voices back then, it just wasn't concentrated. You didn't see that much people going into these spaces and really speaking on, the topics that you kind of covered today with the BPA. How did it feel when it came to like going into that shift that you start to see more black folks and start to see more black voices start to speak up and kind of be more amplified? Like what was like your initial reaction and how was it like even hard for you trying to like, okay, now that we see this audience, how do we try our best to not only grow but really have an efficient system where everything is working well and everyone who is coming in contact with us is getting the best, piece of information that they could possibly get?
Oh, you mean from the BPA?
Yes.
So when I do things, you mentioned risk. I'm a risk. I take risk. I've survived car accidents, been shot at, all that stuff. So I like when you say fear, I got caught. When I had my real estate properties, I lost them in the bubble that popped in 2009. So I understand loss. So for me, it was I'm going to take this risk. I'm going to jump in here. Biggest question I always say is, who am I to dictate this? But for me, there has to be a standard of for content. Period. Right. There has to be a standard. I don't care black, white, whatever. There has to be a level of standard of professionalism that we put into what we do. And this has come from me as a supervisor of working jobs and working in certain fields and also being an employee. I've learned, like I said, a lot of things that I do I've picked up along the way, and I've encompassed into this. From black content point of view, I now for me, and a lot this might not be a popular view for a lot of people because a lot of people like to scream black excellence and stuff. I'm not a big fan of that, that whole push. For me, it was an area of concern because when more black people started jumping into it, I was seeing one, people being taken advantage of because of their lack of knowledge in this space. That's where we had, especially, when the COVID happened and the lockdown first started, the first 3 months, I was running a mobile podcast studio. My business model blew up in my face, right? I wasn't going to people, I was bringing the studio to you and, nobody was doing anything. So it was like, I had people telling me, get into coaching, do this. And I was like, I didn't want to do it because I saw what those people were doing, like the gurus and stuff. And I could see clearly the grifting that was happening. So I was like, people are getting taken advantage of because they're doing this impulse thing of like, oh, let me start a podcast, let me jump in here, and let me just do it without any plan, any knowledge, and I'll learn as I go along. And then the grifters come and take advantage of you. The also standard of is the impulse part, right? The impulse was like, oh, let me just do it, and I'm like, and then they're doing this, and then they're fading out, or they're quitting, or they're saying, I don't know why I'm not getting an audience. Well, your podcast sucks. And I've told people this. Your podcast sucks. Your audio sucks. Your content sucks. And this is, I hear my grandparents. This is one time I hear my grandmother all the time. If you want to do something right, you got to do it right from the beginning. So for me, it was like, okay, how do I raise the standard? And this is, some people might hear this as like a kissing white people's ass. No, it's just we live in a certain world where we have to raise the bar. They always expect us to be 10 times better than them. Okay, let's raise the bar. Let's at least create a minimum standard of professionalism or how we do things so that you don't have to deal with that fight, that argument. Plus, you'll feel better about yourself because you're doing the best. You're giving it your best and you're giving it your all versus you just saying, I'm gonna get on the microphone and jump on here and just say what I want to say. Right? You're putting time, effort, and investment into what you're doing. So for me, those were the things like I was like really concerned about when I started this, when I started seeing, because that's and it's not even a color thing. That's what any industry, right? It happened with gold prospecting. It happened with real estate booms. I remember in the tech boom in the early 2000s, that's what happened. People just jumped in without knowing anything. And I come from a family of educators, so I'm also big on education because an educated person makes better decisions. Period. You understand what you're doing better, you can make better decisions and figure out what works best for you and what doesn't. So those were like the real areas of concern for me when people were jumping in. So I took on the responsibility of saying, okay, let me create a space where we try to give you as much of that as possible. Not everybody was happy with it, but most people they gravitated towards it.
Yeah, I definitely feel that because again, like you mentioned, people jump into a space, but it's the impulse where they don't have the knowledge and the understanding. So then it becomes like a pickup game or pickup race trying to catch up on all the information, where like for you, you want to be able to provide something where it's like from the start, it's kind of helping you to build and to kind of learn, rather than just for people who are going to jump in and then like they don't know what they're doing, and then like a year or two later, that's when they start digging into the pieces they should have got from day one. And it's like
Right.
now it becomes this whole cycle where you have to kind of retrace your steps, go backward and everything. Where at that point in the 1 or 2 years, you should be already like looking forward or like building on what you've already established because you took those necessary steps at the beginning.
Or your ego becomes so ingrained in it that you just keep digging a bigger and bigger ditch, and you just keep going down this rabbit hole that you created for yourself. And being able to pivot, adjust, and do all those things now almost virtually becomes impossible for you to do. And then you become frustrated, and it's just a whole lot of things that go with that.
There's a lot, trust me. So yeah, the next question I want to get to is just, and it kind of ties in a little bit to what we just talked about with the Black Podcaster Association, but I did want to go a little bit more deeper into it. So when did you start your career in the podcast industry, and who were some of the people that you got in connection with that helped you kind of build your own pathway, but also were like great mentors?
And that's the beauty of, like, this whole podcasting thing. Like, I live in New York City, like, any, everything happens. I opened the window thinking it was nice outside, not knowing that the guy was coming to cut the grass. My story in podcasting actually happens in the early 2000s when I was in music. I was working in an internet cafe, and it was bad business, wrong location in a residential neighborhood. So we didn't have any big customers usually most of the day. So I would typically be on the internet. That's how I got into programming, actually, because I had nothing else to do. So I started learning how to program. I would watch a lot of the business news, and this when the whole Napster thing was happening. So I was still chasing the dream of being in the music industry, and I started a website called don'tgetjerked.com. And I was just one day stumbling, and I discovered this like podcast player thing, this audio player you put RSS feeds into, and you could listen to people's audio. And I was like, this is dope, right? This is cool. And I talked with my developer that I had helping me build a website, and we were going to build, like, for artists, we were going to build this thing, that the same similar thing. Don'tgetjerked.com was to help our independent artists with their music. And we were like, well, we can add this, and this will be a great dynamic for an artist to connect with their audience outside of, the normal means at that time. And then, of course, life happens. Couldn't afford to keep that going, and I was making $8,000 an hour. And this shit, excuse me, it was costing like $10,000 to have this website built. So I couldn't. It just wasn't, the math wasn't mathing.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, that project fell to the wayside. So then life happens. Went on a couple of years. Come 2013, my friend is like, "Yo, listen to this podcast," and I was like, "What? They're still around? Like, people are still doing that?" And he was like, "Yeah." And that's why I started as a fan. And then I was in school driving Uber, had a car accident in 2018, and my friend and I were talking about, we were trying to start a podcast. We had an investor and everything. We were going to do like a mobile thing where we were going to go city to city, do interviews and stuff. And when I had my accident, I got messed up. So I was like, well, I have free time now. So I just started learning how to build a podcast, consuming tons and tons of content. But I got to shout out a couple people. First person I'm going to shout out is Shannon Hernandez, who was actually the guy who helped me get my mobile podcast studio off the ground. He is a radio host out in Arizona. Don't know what city, but you can look him up. I like the way he presented. He used to be an ex-teacher, so he presented his content very well on how to podcast. So, and I saw he was doing something. I reached out to him one time, and he told me his setup, and I went up and I went to my last $2,000 and brought it. So, he was one of my first people that I really gravitated to in this space to learn about podcasting. The beauty of this community is I've met so many people who've been supportive, but like, who can I shout out? Talib Jasir at Afros and Audio, Eldell Coleman and Chris Colbert at DCP Entertainment, Elsie Escobar at Libsyn and of She Podcast, Danielle Desir Corbett of Women of Color Podcast Community, Kayla Tompkins Robinson of SEO Assist. And then my members are so instrumental. Like my guy Rob Dunwood, who I do some Twitter spaces with, Bethany Hawkins of Chatting Over Child. Like all these people have been instrumental in helping me those are just a few handful people. So if I'm missing anybody, it's not on purpose. I've had so much support from people in this industry. Ariel Nizenblatt, she has so many she has so many podcasts and stuff, but of Earbuds Collective, and she's the manager over at Descript, Squadcast and Descript. Lauren Passel of Tink Media. So it's like so many people have been supportive of what we're doing and offered help and assistance and advice, and it's just too many people to name, man.
I
And I
feel
know I
you.
love
I
some
feel
more.
you.
I love some important people off this list, and I apologize anybody if you see this or hear this. That if I left you off, but it wasn't intentional.
Yeah, listen, it's all love in here, and it's really great to hear that.
Oh, I
You,
got two more people. I'm sorry.
okay, go
I
ahead, go
can't
ahead.
miss them. Afrika and Mimi Jax of the Mimi Mimi podcast. They're two of my members, but we wouldn't be having this conversation if it wasn't for them because they were the ones who pushed me like you got to start going doing interviews and talking and live streaming and stuff. And they clowned the hell out of me. That's why I did. I'm a competitive person, so they clowned the crap out of me to the point where I was like, all right, I'm gonna do it.
I mean, sometimes you need that push. So
I mean, well, they clowned me. They was making. I didn't like it. I was sitting there like, I'm gonna show y'all.
yeah, man, and like again, it's always good to keep like a little inner circle around you that's gonna keep pushing you in what you're doing. And obviously, for a lot of people who's listening, sometimes finding that inner circle it takes a while. It won't be immediately. I know for me, it's still trying to like take me a time to like okay, what are the right people I need to connect with, or who the people I can rely on, or who's gonna be the people that are supporting
Right.
me. And like I've been doing this for 3 years, I could probably say like I have like maybe 2 to 3 people, but maybe I want to still expand that, or maybe I still want to start looking around like, okay, who really is like invested in my vision or who really supports the stuff that I do. So again, like it's good to hear that you have, a good collection of people that have supported you in what you do, but also been good mentors and allowing you to build the legacy that you've done so far with the Black Podcasters Association.
Can I just jump in real quick on that?
Yeah.
I think that's why having community is important because when you build a community, you're building your circle. So like all of my members have input. All of my members I've interacted with. They've supported me. They support the community wholeheartedly, but they support me sometimes. When your community is telling you, Corey, you need to go get some rest. Every time I go to bed, I see you on here. You go, I get up in the morning, you're on here. Like, and then you start to build your inner circle, right? A majority of people that I interact with, they genuinely care because we're in a community together and we get to know each other. We get to move, towards a common goal together. So, and it's a process, right? It takes time, like you said. You've been doing this for 3 years. It takes time to build that really strong core of people that you can rely on, and for and it takes life, it takes experiences, it takes things to happen, it takes things for you to really sort through where people's positions are in your inner and outer circle. I think community helps a lot with that. Building a community helps a lot with that.
Yeah, definitely for sure. Okay, so the next question I want to ask you is why do you believe that the voice for like black folks or like the black creator in this new media, this new medium is so important to this current generation and for many generations to come? Because again, I've been seeing a lot of black podcasters pop up, and it's a beautiful sight. It's great to see someone of like your own community build something and just connect or just share what they're doing. But why do you feel like it's so vital that these individuals, these black podcasters, are like the forefront for this new medium in podcasting for this generation, but also generations to come?
Man, you really be sitting down thinking of these questions, right? So I think with black podcasters, we're starting to see we were always there. I think with social media and these new tools and the fact that it's hard to gatekeep it. I want to say that you're seeing more people coming in. You're just starting to see is more access to it, right? It's becoming with these social media platforms, with the algorithms that promote content like reels and shorts and stuff like that. It's making us more visible, and a lot of our content creators more visible. We've a lot of these people have been there for a very long time. It's debatable for some people, whatever. But being black in this world, we have been, from the roots, right? We've been the creators of civilization. We've been in the forefront through our ancestry of being, the father and mother of all human beings and stuff. So I think we have a that soul, or that, that spice, or whatever it is. We're more than just salt and pepper on food, right? So I think that brings a lot of flair. I think also part of it is our experiences, right? I know you're in Canada, I'm here in these states, but we have different experiences, but we have very similar experiences, especially in the northern hemisphere, in regards to racism and stuff like that, access to resources, so forth and so on. That we have to learn to be creative and learn how to do things outside of the box, versus how some other groups of people may be able to just cookie cut what they do and get them the modicum of success that they get. So because we're coming with a different approach, because we're coming with a different flair of creativity, it separates you from the others. Now, that doesn't mean we don't suffer the same case as a many other group of copycats, because we do, right? Kevin Samuels died. All of a sudden, oh, now you're starting everybody trying to fill that void in the space of the relationship guru. And everybody's kind of like him, like, taking on that persona of being, very uncut in regards to how they deal with people. So we do also fall into that too. And that's where I come in as the person who likes to rain on parades and be the voice of reason and say, hey, it's good that we're starting to get, this spotlight on us, but it's dangerous, because now you're creating the copycats, and you're creating the people who are just going to think, oh, that. And I saw that when I was in the music industry growing up in Queens. I was the DJ Clue was from my area, right? So I remember DJ Clue was like the big, up and coming. He had to separate himself from all the other DJs. What happened? He started doing exclusives. He started getting exclusive from artists, so you can only listen to this song on his mixtapes. That's how he blew up. He changed the business model where everybody else was blending rap and music and stuff with R&B and all that. He came with exclusives. When I was working at Def Jam, that was the first question. Yo, you got any exclusive stuff for me? Now all the DJs want to copy that because they think that's how you get successful. So we have that. We have to balance that out. When we're talking about, black content being put to the forefront, but also we have to be very careful that you can be pushed so far back, so far into the front, that the trail you're leaving behind is just it's a trail of uncreative people.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I definitely agree. Because I know for a lot of black content creators, again, like you mentioned, it's not even a matter of you're starting to see more, but it's starting to be more accessible to, hear them. Because again, back then it was a little bit more difficult. There was a lot of barriers that were placed upon where we
Hmm.
couldn't really express or have a platform to really share. But the way how social media or just digital media has been revolutionized over the last decade alone, like the last couple years, especially that intensification, it's allowed to have spaces or even platforms like a Black Podcast Association or even like a Black Canadian content creators. They're very active when it comes to showcasing a lot of the different creators, entrepreneurs, small businesses that reside here in Canada. And it's amazing how, people don't even realize that. They think it's just now the matter of like, oh, black folks are now getting like the chance to come in and like really express. It's like we've been here. It's just been the matter of we never had that door to step into. We were always there. We were just waiting outside the door because again there was a certain standard. It's like we were not allowed to really express. And like you mentioned, we have to think outside the box. Just for other folks where they may be able to get into a certain space, we have to think about like 10 different ways just to get past the front door. So like it's always like adapting and trying to figure out ways to just, build our legacy while dealing with all the different things that are placed in front of us.
And we also have to we have to be careful with these kind of conversations too, because we don't want to discredit the people who came before us, right? Like there's people who are in this podcast space who have been very vocal about diversity, who have been very vocal about companies and certain groups being, changing their policies and recognizing the work that BIPOC, not just Black people, but BIPOC creators are bringing to the table. And I don't want not to my own horn, but like I try to, part of my group is advocacy, but there's people out here who've been building relationships, networking way before I got involved in it. And it's their work that has helped also to bring Black content more prevalent when they talking to these companies or when things are getting supported. So it's I don't want to discredit those people and the work that they've done, because there's always somebody who comes before you who makes it easier for the people that come behind them.
That's very true. That's very, very true. And you did mention about like, the US and Canada, which is actually the next part I want to get into because I do want to kind of discuss just the different landscapes between Canadian podcasting and American podcasting. Because again, podcasting again is a new medium, like you mentioned. I would probably say like over the last 5 years, obviously it didn't start the last 5 years, but I feel like since 2018, there's been such an intensification or resurgence in the matter where a lot of people are getting into podcasting, not only from a listening perspective, but also being part of that community. So whether it's, businesses who are now trying to like take that jump into podcasting so they can see if they could, you know, make some money off of it. You've been seeing a lot from different businesses or even just individuals that want to get into it or even creators. You're seeing a lot of creators on social media taking a toll into podcasting. But obviously, the biggest conversation it comes between Canadian podcasting and American podcasting. Everyone says that American podcasting has grown and it's continued to grow, where Canadian podcasting it's still like, and this is not me saying it's what a lot of people kind of justify. It's still in like an infancy stage where it's building, but it's not on the level of American podcasting. So I wanted to ask you is just what do you think about that notion where people say American podcasting is on a higher level than Canadian podcasting? Has it been something that you tried to had a conversation with different people about to kind of, I don't know, create a middle passage, a middle balance, or more just to see how can we come together so Canadian podcasting, American podcasting can, grow as one?
One thing we need to understand is just podcasting. Now, granted, yes, here in the US, it's big because that's where the market started. That's where the market really grew. That's where the market started. So it's going to have the lion's share of market share, right? It's going to be a bigger portion. Now, don't quote me if I'm wrong, but there's also population, right? There's a bigger population in the US than there is in Canada. So you have that proportional stuff that you have to take into consideration as well. There's the cultural side. I can't speak for Canadians, and you can correct me where I'm wrong, or please feel free to correct me where I'm wrong. Maybe it's adoption to the technology, right? I don't know how that works. If the phone services there work differently than here, where we have access to broadband, because I know in other countries broadband is still a big issue, like as far as video, like they're like 20 years behind compared to the US, where I've heard like people like in Africa, India, like, they don't need the videos they downloaded what I used to download on Windows, Windows XP, right? Like that kind of stuff. So
Yeah, I mean, from my understanding, just to cut you off a bit, just from my understanding, I think like from the telecommunication standpoint, it's not the greatest. I would probably say. I mean, it's kind of like it's and I feel like we're a little bit behind compared to other countries as well. I don't think we're on that higher end when it comes to that. So yeah, but continue.
and some of that's cultural, right? Like it's like, like do people in your country or your state or your look, man, I'm sorry. Anybody listen, I'm not trying to offend, but your area it's culturally, is it like here in, New York, everybody's on their phone. So here they're gonna roll out 5G here more faster than they might roll out other parts of the US, right? Because that people they know people are going to use it, they're going to access it immediately, they're going to capitalize. So I think when we're having these conversations, people have to stop and think about all the nuances of it, not just say U.S. is, Canadian podcasters are not getting the respect that they deserve for the work that they do because the U.S. blah 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 blah. Some of that is true, and that's something with my community I'm trying to work on. Like, shout out to Shirley Joseph at Black Canadian Content Creators, and shit at But What Do I Know podcast, right? Like I've tried to support them as best as I can, and we've talked about this. We've talked about how do we bridge this gap, especially for Black content creators and podcast creators in this space. How can we help support our cousins across the border to help you guys get more footing in our markets? And some of it is you need to join. You need to join some of these communities, not just mine, but like, if you're a woman of color, go to Women of Color podcast, like, because this is where your voice is going to get heard. This is where you're going to make the network connections, and with people here in the States. But when I was like Black podcast, when I found these like the Black Podcast Association, I thought about it on a global scale. I was like, this is podcast as an opportunity for us to connect with the whole diaspora, Canada, Latin America, Africa, and those people, Europe, and then those people who are even in Asia, because we have a large population of people, Black people from the diaspora in Asia. And I was like, this is an opportunity for us to come together to dispel some of the myths, the stereotypes, and collectively have conversations that will appeal to all of us on a global scale. So I try to, like, being a web developer, looking at data and understand how data works. It's like I try to look at the data. I try to, add the little nuances to say, hey, okay, yes, we could sit here and say US is more than Canadian. Yes, can US gets more respect than Canadian. And no famous works in South Park, blame Canada, right? Like, but no, but then you have to stop and say, okay, that's just surface level. Let's go a little bit deeper and understand why this is happening. It's more than just US versus Canada. Is more, okay, what about population? How much of your population in comparison to the total population actually listen to podcasts? Okay. And then break that down. Well, how many of those are black content creators? How many of those listen to, black content? And you guys start going down to those little nuances. Despite all of that, we have a great opportunity here, especially in the beginning of this industry, to come together and figure out, because one of the things I talk about is black people are not monoliths. Canadians have a different experience than us here in the US and vice versa. And that's an experience that we should be sharing and listening to and learning more about. So I think for Canadian content creators, sometimes we gotta, like one of my favorite physicists, Richard Feynman, says, he's like, I'm summarizing this, but he basically says if you understand something truly, you could break it down to a 5-year-old, right? You can explain it to a 5-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
I think for podcasters, sometimes we get too complicated with our content. We have to, Canadians may have to break it down to a way that's consumable for you. If you're trying to target US listeners, you got to make it in a way, because there are cultural things on how we consume content versus how other people in the world consume content. Like, it's very nuanced. There's a lot of layers to this, and it's not just a simple answer. But and I say that not to say that you're downplaying your Canadian experience or who you are as a Canadian or where you identify from. It's just you need to understand the market you're targeting or you're trying to get into, and be able to give it to them in the fastest, most consumable way to help you reach your goals.
Yeah, I definitely feel that. And you mentioned some good, indicators of just like the difference. Again, I do think population plays a
It's,
huge factor because, like, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong as well. And this is kind of from my understanding. I know Toronto's like very busy, especially the downtown area. That's where you usually have like a lot of like activity going on. But I don't know in terms of the other provinces, like I'm pretty sure BC and like Alberta, those are not really places that like are very active when it comes to like technological advances or just like telecommunications. So that could also be another thing because I think people look at
Mhm.
Canada more as like a rural country rather than like it's very active 24/7 compared to like the United States where again everything is just kind of fast paced. So I think that definitely plays a role. And I think for a lot of people like they may even look at their statistics and they're like, I have listeners in the States, but at the same time, like I don't feel like it's connecting to enough people because there's so much, and there's again the states are so much bigger than Canada. Then it kind of offsets the fact that yeah, I have like maybe a good portion. Like maybe I have like 40% of listeners in the United States, but still looking at the sample, that might be a sample size compared to the overall population of the United States. So again, I feel like a lot of people are still trying to connect into that market or connect into that area. And I feel like, yeah, like if there's ways to create a bridge and kind of branch out to, then I think that would be really great. Cause I know a lot of people, including myself, they want to connect with more, people within the United States. I have a lot of listeners in Canada, which is fine. And I think you said there's nuances to podcasting. There's so much layers where we may have to like kind of break down our content in a way compared to like if we're sharing it to Canadian. Maybe if Canadian, like you understand it. If you're someone from like Nebraska or North Carolina, it's like maybe I have to like take it a little bit slower, you know?
I love Canadian humor. I used to watch SCTV when I was a kid. So like John Candy, all of those, like I used to love it. You guys got some great comedians that came out of Canada. Here's the thing though. Canada is not isolated in those things like you mentioned. It's just, we have the same problem here in the States. There's only what 40 something million, 48 million black people in the United States. So now you got to shrink that number even smaller when you're talking about podcast listeners. But the most important part, so like you mentioned, like let's say you have 40% audience in the US and you're trying to figure out why you're not growing. Well, you know what? The same problem we have here is the same problem you have there. You're not promoting it. And I'm talking about social media. I'm talking about you're not putting marketing, advertising dollars behind your product so that you can reach those targeted audiences. And that's why it's important to understand who your target audience is from the beginning so that you can shape the content. Because, if I was doing a podcast about the Caribbean, like a Jamaican based podcast, right? I know that Britain, Canada, and the States will be my target audiences. So I would need to figure out, understand that target audience, and then say, hey, how do I create content that it resonates with all three so that I can get more reach? That's where everybody's struggling. It doesn't matter whether you're black, white, Spanish, Asian, whatever. That's the problem where everybody's struggling. Is a lot of podcasters come here. When I ask them who's your audience, it's always a generalized statement. And I'm willing to bet if I talk to Canadian podcasters, I would get the same thing because that's just a human thing. It's not a location thing.
Right. For sure, for sure. Okay. Yeah, I love this conversation we've had so far. It's been really informative, but also very opening as well. I feel for anyone listening, this is a good indicator, just like the realm of podcasting, like what it really is, like just pulling back different layers. Because I feel like a lot of people assume when it comes to podcasting, it's very simplistic, and I think that's something we wish it would be. We would wish it's
I
simplistic, but
wish
it's not.
I'd be a millionaire right now.
Yeah, I mean, if that was the case, we'd be all eating good. But it's good to be, again, like you said, transparent. That's something that you like to be very transparent. And I think this conversation has been a really great help in learning just to share what podcasting really goes into, not just the recorded edit aspect, but even the outside things in terms of just how you're presenting yourself, how you're trying to build upon your platform and your brand, but also finding ways to look at the global landscape of it and see, how can we find ways to come together, but also find ways to really, tap into that niche audience. So I think that's really great that we were able to get into this conversation fully. But that's basically everything I have for today. So Corey, thank you so much for coming on the Safe Room. This was a fantastic conversation, and hopefully this isn't the last one. Hopefully we can come back again for another talk.
Definitely. I really appreciate being here. I love, I rarely turn down requests when people come to me to ask, especially when I want to talk about the BPA and what we're doing. I like the idea of the safe room. I like the idea of having a safe space. People can feel comfortable talking. So I really appreciate the work you're doing, and I look forward to coming back.
Yeah, of course, of course. Where can people find you, or preferably the BPA, and just like connect with you sometime?
All right. So first things first, if you're interested in joining the BPA, we have thanks to Heytai app, which is it's the largest black owned app that deals with black content publishers, like blogs, news, but also black podcasts. We have a partnership going with them, and if you're interested in joining the BPA, whether you're a beginner or an expert, or if you're a professional like an editor or whatever, you can go to www.getbpa.com and you can sign up and you get your first, you get 2 months free. With that, social media platforms, we're on all major social media platforms. I run most of it. So if you ever have a question, you can hit me on the DMs. Most likely you'll be talking to me. But we're on Instagram at the Black Podcast Association. Here's what, because of our name is so long, here's what I'll tell you. Just go on your favorite social media app, whether it's LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, X, formerly known as Twitter, or whatever, Facebook. Just do a search for the Black Podcast Association, because on each platform they have limitations. So all of our handles are a little bit different. We're also on YouTube, so you can check out some of our content on there as well. But just do a search or Google search for the Black Podcast Association, and all our stuff will come up because our brand is unique.
All right, perfect. That sounds great. Again, Corey, really appreciate your time coming on, and thank you to everyone listening to the Safe Room. You can follow me on Instagram at the Safe Room Official. Check us out on TikTok. Subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. We're getting back to uploading content. Things have been very hectic on my end, but I promise you there will be videos coming very, very soon. Follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, all the platforms that you could think of. Find us, give us a review, give us 5 stars. We really appreciate if you could. It's not me pressuring you. If you really enjoy what you see with the Safe Room, then it'd be nice to hear some feedback in terms of just how we're doing. Maybe there's some ideas you want to hear, some topics, special guests. I'm definitely open to anything. Again, this is the safe room. It's a safe space for everyone. So again, thank you to everyone who listened, and we'll see you guys next time.